All right. Good morning. I am Adrienne Bird. I am the VP of Finance here at Greening Youth Foundation, and I am excited to be here with HBCUR for our 10th year celebration and to be a part of being a moderator for your poster presentations. As Ebony said, everyone, we have 10 minutes allotted for each presentation, and we will go in order. You'll see your initial slide pop up with your name. So once your name pops up, you can just begin your presentation from there. I think everyone pretty much has 1 to 2 slides. So if you need me to transition to the next slide, then I can do so. You probably want to keep your presentation to about 6 minutes so that we can allot for additional minutes, an additional 4 minutes for questions. Feel free to ask any questions once we get to that session. Everyone should be on mute, but you can always just unmute. It's a small group, so it's no need to do any hand raising. And that's pretty much it. I'll share all of the presentations, so you don't have to worry about having to share your screen or pulling up your posters. I'm sure you guys highlighted the key components in your slide for your internship. If there's something that's not on your slide that you find of value that can really fully paint the picture of your internship experience over the summer, then feel free to use your time to go over those things. Any questions? All right, well, let's get started. And first we have Shawn, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you guys see the presentation? Can everyone see? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. All right, perfect. Shawn, you're up.
All right, thank you. How is everybody doing? Good morning. My name is Shawn Smith Jr. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. Over the past 3 months, I have been participating in the Colonel Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. And then I guess I'll start my presentation from here. Do I ask you to go to the next slide, or how does this work? Thank you. So first, starting off, the first picture, just to talk about a little bit of the history of the Colonel Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. Colonel Charles Young was born into slavery in 1864. Colonel Young grew up across the river in Ripley, Ohio. He also went on to become the third African-American to graduate from West Point Academy. And the first 2 that graduated from West Point Academy were Henry Osane Flipper. I believe he graduated in 1877. And then second was John Hanks Alexander, who graduated in 87, 10 years after. And Alexander and Colonel Charles Young were roommates at the time. Colonel Charles Young was also the first African-American going to become the first African-American to become a colonel of the Army. While I was there, my job duties were simple, just giving tours, planning events, surveying the property, and community outreach. The picture that I posted there in the middle is when we had July 4th in Xenia, Ohio, and we were just passing out flyers and getting to know the community more. Other events that we had through while I was working there was an event called Action Art in the Park that we had for Juneteenth. And that's pretty much where we had students from Central State and students from Wilberforce University come to the house and participate in tours. And then we had guest speakers for them. Me and my coworker, Trinity, we had guest speakers for them and separated them up into groups. And then after that, they went out into the yard of the park and then had Action Art in the Park. That's the third picture that you see with the word impact on it. And then other things like part of giving the tours, we had to learn the knowledge. That was kind of interesting for me. Just learning more about where I was at and the impact Colonel Charles Young had on the area. And then the impact that I feel like I had on or the internship had on me, it showed me how I was capable of doing things that I thought were just simply out my reach. Just kind of picked up on my communication skills, got outside my comfort zone with giving tours to everybody. Also, it had an impact on how I communicate with others. Just being more positive for real. Learning how to talk with a smile, just different things that I'm really kind of uncomfortable with. And then the impact that it had on the community, I feel like was remarkable. Some of the young men and women who came to the park for the Action Art in the Park really, as I continue to communicate with them, because I go to Wilberforce University, and a lot of them are have decided to, attend the school for the fall semester. They told me that they really enjoyed that, just being able to get out their comfort zones, not being in the community that they were, normally used to being in, and just doing something that they never thought they'd do before. And then since that, the July 4th event in Xenia and the Action Art in the Park, I feel like the visitation has really increased. I'm sorry, I'm trying to sit on the porch. But the visitation has increased since both of those events. And I just felt like the impact that it had on the community, myself and the college students was huge. And then that's pretty much it for my presentation.
Okay. That was a very good presentation, Shawn. Sorry, I didn't realize if I was on mute or not. Are there any questions for Shawn? Shawn, I know you mentioned the impact that the internship had on you. What is your biggest takeaway from this experience over the summer?
I honestly feel like my biggest takeaway is that you really got to be comfortable. You can't really try to pre-plan how something is going to go. You got to just not go with the punches, but go with what's given, with hopes that everything will go okay. And that's really what happened for me. I kind of went in there like I don't really know what to expect. And the outcome was much more greater than what I had imagined. Also, just showing me that the little area where Wilberforce is in, how historical it is for real. Me coming from Indianapolis, Indiana, then going to Ohio, looking at all the cornfields. The first thing that came to my mind was racism. You get what I'm saying? It was like racism.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was in that this program, I learned how historical just that area was with the both schools, Central State and Wilberforce neighboring each other. And then with the Colonel Charles Young House and then the whole community of Xenia. It just gave me a whole different outlook. You know what I'm saying? And it made me more comfortable in my environment too, just to know that, hey, some influential people have gone here. You know what I'm saying? And just going to the school, like Paul Lawrence Dunbar taught at the school, W.E.B. Du Bois, just other influential people like that. Me as a Black man, that kind of made me feel good, like, okay, woke me up just a tad bit more than I already was.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And that kind of goes into the question I was going to similarly ask you. And I guess you kind of already asked it, but I was going to ask the impact that it had on you, kind of seeing the great people that you are now learning the history of, telling the history of, kind of walking the same path that they walked in being there, as you, I guess, kind of so eloquently mentioned. If there's anything else you wanted to expound on as it relates to that, just kind of, I guess, understanding the impact of those people that you were learning about. Is there another takeaway from that? As you said, being in the same space with W.E.B. Du Bois and even learning about Colonel Charles Young, like, is there, sometimes I think I've found that in studying about people that took the path before us, it kind of just adds a different level of perspective as we are, as I'm sure you all are now coming to that space of going to the next phase of life and just really embodying what they went through, and looking at the differences of the experiences that, or the opportunities, I should say that you have now. Was there a takeaway for you as it relates to that?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of goes into like how I kind of I guess the stigma around per se working in for the government. You get what I'm saying? Uh it, like I say, me going into it, I didn't really I didn't really want to work for the government or this branch of the government. You know what I'm saying? I never heard nothing good about it. You know what I'm saying? So like me going into that and then learning about like Colonel Charles Young and all the adversity that he had went through, and then just different people, like you say, W.E.B. Du Bois, everything that they went through, it just kind of showed me like, if I feel like I can't make it through this, then they really wasted their time, because the things that they went through were much more, far more complicated and harsh. You know what I'm saying? Just the time frame and everybody that they had to deal with. So they branch of the government and my branch of the government was two different things. You know what I'm saying? I'm only working for the National Park Service, but he was an actual army man. You know what I'm saying? So I just felt like it gave me a little motivation. For real, it gave me a different perspective. Like, I don't have to react to certain things, you know what I'm saying? Or certain things that would make me feel a certain type of way. I don't necessarily have to indulge in that for real. You know what I'm saying? I can figure out a different way to deal with the same, I can't even say the same situations, but, situations that I feel like were tough for me, I just kind of put myself in their shoes and was like, hey, if they could get through it, it ain't too much for me to get through. You know what I'm saying? So it definitely made my skin tougher.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing your experience, Shawn.
On everything, thank you.
All right, and now we'll go to, I think, Trinity, you're next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Trinity Battle. So I am the other community Centennial Steward intern at the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. And you can go to the next slide. So I actually have two slides, y'all. Just a heads up, but yeah. So just a little bit about the history of the home. So it is the home of Colonel Charles Young. He was the third African-American to graduate from West Point Academy in 1889. He was the first African-American colonel, and he was also the first African-American superintendent of a national park, which was the Sequoia Park. And he also taught military science and tactics at Wilberforce University, which we now know today as ROTC. So the internship, it impacted me in a lot of ways. We did a lot of different programs with the community of Xenia. We had youth outreach programs. I also had a table that I would set up at Central State University, the new student orientations, where I would just talk to them about the site, who Colonel Charles Young was, who the Buffalo Soldiers were. The Buffalo Soldiers were actually African-American soldiers, and they got that name from Native Indian tribes that they would encounter during the Indian Wars. And the hair of the African-American actually resembles the wool of the buffalo. And the buffalo also represents bravery. So that is where they got the name. But the internship, it helped me realize a lot of things about myself. I'm a person who's typically very nervous, very scared to talk at times, but it was able to just kind of give me a little bit of confidence. I was sure of the knowledge that I was learning and the things that I was speaking on. So yes, you can go to the next slide. So my job duties were just off-site exposure and representation. The picture in the right-hand corner, that is actually one of the tables that I would set up at Central State's new student orientations. Planning and executing programs. We had a successful Juneteenth event, which was Action Art in the Park. It was art therapy, and they wanted to use boxing gloves and toy guns and things like that to represent that things that are meant to hurt us we can actually use them in a positive way. So people were using boxing gloves and things like that, and punching different things and throwing metals at the paint boards and things like that, just to kind of express their feelings and just get that out. So it was called Action Art in the Park for that reason. And we also I spoke to a group of young ladies from Wilberforce University who actually will be attending Wilberforce University this fall, just about the importance of HBCUs and why they were established for us. And I just gave them a lot of helpful tips about surviving college and surviving their freshman year overall. And then overall, we just provided tours in the home. We provided a lot of tours this summer. And the hardest thing about providing the tours was there's a different audience every time. So some people may not be as welcoming. Some people may not really want to hear it. Some people may want to hear it for mischievous reasons or for hidden agendas. But I really learned to just stick to the story. No matter what someone's attitude may be towards me, or no matter how they feel, I was just there to tell the story. So that was the hardest thing to kind of realize and push past. But once I did, it was very free flowing. So overall, it was a good experience. The bottom picture is actually me with a group of young ladies that I was talking to. And just a little bit about me. I'm a senior at Central State University. I'm a communications broadcast media major, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I obviously go to school in Wilberforce, but I actually don't run into that many white people, to say the least. So this internship was different because that's all I kind of seen every day coming in the house, obviously because it's right in the area of Xenia and Wilberforce. So that's the bigger majority in the area. But yep, that's the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Trinity. Are there any questions for Trinity?
I have a quick question. So Trinity, you mentioned that you don't really interact with a lot of mainly Black people, right? So for this internship experience, you found yourself interacting more with white people and I guess others.
Yeah.
So what was that adjustment like? That's something that a lot of our interns experience, because they're being sent off to different park sites all over the country. And in a lot of these places, the people, the community there, the park site, the staff don't look like them. So can you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Well, for me, it was more so finding a balance. Growing up, my mom would always switch her voice when she spoke to, I guess, white people, to say it bluntly. So for me, it was realizing that I don't have to switch my voice. I can be myself. It's just more of being in a professional environment. So I was looking at it as more of like a race thing, and more of like, well, I have to act this way when white people are around. Well, really, it just all comes down to being professional. It was definitely a switch because not all white people have the same feelings about African Americans, and you could tell that some people were just coming in to sort of be racist, or they had like their own agenda as to why they would come and visit the house. So it was really just about finding that balance and also keeping my cool. It was at times little things would offend me that some people would say, but again, I just had to kind of realize like I'm just here to tell the story of Colonel Young and the Buffalo Soldiers. I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm not here to really appease anyone. I'm just here to tell the story. So it was really just finding that balance and realizing that it's not really about race. It's just about conducting yourself professionally, period.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Trinity, as you're a senior, I'm assuming you're preparing for graduation. How has this internship experience, how is it helping you going into your senior year and maybe looking at your future beyond Central State?
Well, it helped me in a lot of ways. I realized how good I am at calculations, and I don't mean that in a mathematical way. I feel at this internship, we were always on our toes. We kind of always had to continuously plan ahead, continuously think ahead at times. So it really just helped me understood what I like to do. Like, I do like to plan, and I do like to set up tables and talk to people. I do like to be a representation for whatever company I may be working for. So it kind of just helps me entering senior year, really just knowing what career path I may want to go after graduation. And just, it helped my overall abilities, my communication skills, critical thinking skills, pretty much people skills. Honestly, I'm not really a big people person, but when you're giving tours every day, you have to be. So it helped me a lot prepare for senior year. And I feel a lot more confident and sure of the things that I want to do and sure of the things that I am good at, per se, going into senior year.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Trinity. Are there any more questions? All right. Thank you, Trinity.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
All right, next we have Corryn.
Hi, my name is Corryn Carter, and I was an interpretation and education intern at the Selma to Montgomery, on the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail. I attend Alabama State University. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I worked, like I said, on one of the stops for the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail. One of the things that I feel like is sort of distinct about this particular part or this particular experience is that most people have at least some recollection of what this story entails. Like, a lot of people sort of know, at least in part, something about the voting rights movement and the march from Selma to Montgomery. But what I found along the way, and even in my own experience working at the park, was that a lot of the pieces of the story are left out or taught incorrectly. I think a lot of the times when we think about the civil rights movement in Alabama and particularly the voting rights movement, we think about Dr. Martin Luther King, and you'll hear about John Lewis, but you don't necessarily hear about SNCC. And one of the things that, because I was working on the site that was right off the campus of Alabama State, one of the things that she wanted me to do was study the impact of, or the involvement of, the students in the planning of the march and then the execution. So one of the things that I found was that Alabama State college students, because at the time it was just a college and not a university, a lot of them were not necessarily involved in this particular section of the civil rights movement. Prior to this point, there was the Montgomery bus boycott, and a lot of the students who would have been of age to attend Alabama State by the time that 1965 had rolled around, they were kids whose parents were involved in the Montgomery bus boycott. But like 5 years prior to coming, or to 1965, there were students at Alabama State who had protested at the Montgomery courthouse, and they were expelled because the university is publicly funded. Governor George Wallace told Levi Watkins that this particular group of students who had demonstrated at the courthouse were to be expelled. And because Levi Watkins, Alabama State is publicly funded and at the will basically of the state, he was forced to put those kids out of school. So a lot of Alabama State college students weren't necessarily let's be honest. And at this point in history, like the amount of people that could afford to go to college was very few. And even now we see the kind of struggle that African Americans have with getting into school, staying into school because they can't afford it. So at this point, to think about the kind of like honor and like sacrifice that your parents were making in order for you to go to school, for you to be put out was not an option. So a lot of parents and students were obviously discouraged from participating because they didn't want to, bring a dishonor to their family or like have to face the consequences of like not being able to continue their college education. Now at Tuskegee, the circumstances were a bit different because Tuskegee is a private institution. So they typically, or for the most part, they had the support of their university president, and people like Gwen Patton and Sammy Young were able to organize in Tuskegee. And actually, they led a march from Tuskegee to Montgomery after Turnaround Tuesday, which the site for the Montgomery Interpretive Center largely deals with. They led a march after Turnaround Tuesday from Tuskegee to Montgomery because they were afraid that Martin Luther King would not actually continue the march from Selma. They were, after a federal injunction had been passed down from Judge Frank Johnson, Martin Luther King and a lot of other people, after the initial Bloody Sunday march, they got on the bridge, they prayed, and they turned around. Students in Tuskegee were obviously upset because they had been planning alongside Dr. King and SCLC to march. And so they took it upon themselves to start like a second front in Montgomery, and they marched all the way to Montgomery from Tuskegee and tried to have like a meeting with Governor George Wallace. He denied them the meeting, but they stayed anyway. And the violence was so bad, like that the media attention from Selma had actually moved from Selma to Montgomery. So I think overall, the thing that I took away from the internship is that a lot of the pieces of this story are things that generally are overlooked. And I think at the time, what I'm learning, or what I'm continuing to learn, is that students were like very, very heavily involved. And while during this internship, one of the challenges that I had was like identifying who those individual actors were, like as a collective, whether these people were necessarily present or not, they were doing something to make sure that their voices were heard and that they were represented. And the challenges that we see with students being involved now, where older people feel like we're too militant, or there's a flaw in our approach, that was the same thing that was revealed during this time. Like King and SCLC, and then the students of SNCC, there was often like butting of heads because they didn't feel like the approach was the right way. And the faith that King and older Black people had in doing things like in a way that wasn't seen as aggressive, or methods that seemed a bit more passive, the students were feeling like, no, we need to be in their face. We need to do everything short of, actually committing an act of violence. And I thought that was really interesting. I guess the impact that it had on me was it reinforced like the role of young people in the movement, because ultimately, like I said, I think the figures that we focus on when we talk about civil rights, all of them were, older people, like not necessarily in their 20s, but, maybe in their 30s, a little bit more seasoned people. But when you look at the groundwork that was laid for those people to come in, because King wasn't necessarily in Selma from the start, it was the students of SNCC, and then they called him for reinforcement. Like, students have the power to be the change. And I think we always hear that, but when you look at the historical figures that we often highlight, we don't necessarily identify with them. And on my campus, like the parallels between how students at ASU did organize, and the ones that did march and become involved, those parallels are so relatable, because one of the people that actually, whose interview I was actually able to like see and watch, he said, like, we got involved because, we were just complaining about the things that were happening on our campus. We didn't like that we didn't have the same kind of facility as the University of Alabama. And that, while I guess that seems like something superficial at that time, especially given like what we now know, the fact that they were even bold enough to say that at a time like where you were supposed to just be grateful for what you had because you were Black, that's a radical act. And it actually, something did actually come of it. Like, it was found later on that Alabama, like universities like Alabama, and Auburn and stuff, were receiving disproportionate funding in relation to Alabama A&M and ASU. So, and the state had to rectify it. So just knowing that it was regular old kids who were able to like build these big movements that we read about in our history book. And while they might not ever get the recognition that they deserve, like knowing that they were a part of something that changed like the entire trajectory of our country, that was really, really impactful.
Wow, Corryn, that was beautiful. I mean, you covered everything in such a passionate way. I've been to this site and all of the surrounding sites, Tuskegee and even the Montgomery Interpretive Center itself. And I've never heard it from this perspective. So it's great to see that even though everyone goes and they kind of have a different takeaway, but your takeaway was just awesome. It was very impactful. I do have one question, and we are over time for your presentation, but I do want to have the opportunity. Oh no, you're completely fine. I do want to have the opportunity to ask a question, and I see William has a question as well. Can you tell us, and I know you talked about students, and students have always been, as you said, so impactful. And I think we're seeing that even currently now. So do you see, and I think you kind of touched on it, but I just want to bring it out in a different way. Do you see a parallel between SNCC and the BLM movement?
I think that, well, I hate to be biblical, but that's like the way it is in this kind of movement. Like, everybody has always said there's nothing new under the sun. And so absolutely, like, I feel like the ideals, the principles, and even like listening to people who are involved in SNCC now, like the things that they're saying are like the core of these, like the movements that we're leading. Because ultimately the things that these people in Selma were protesting, not only were they protesting for their right to vote, but in places like Lowndes County, like they were protesting against state-sanctioned violence. And like this heightened police presence simply to keep Black people in their place. So absolutely, I definitely feel like the foundation that was laid by like organizations like SNCC across the country is definitely the foundation that movements like Black Lives Matter are built on.
Perfect. And I think the most powerful thing I can take away from what you said is the power of students, the power of young people. And even as you spoke about with the older generation, the 20 and the 30-year-olds, and the foundation was laid by the students, each generation, I think, has a responsibility to pass it. So just as it was passed on to your generation, now there's a generation behind you that's looking, and they're gonna, you're gonna have to pass the torch to them, and so that they can keep the fire that's needed by the young people to really continue to do this foundation and this very important groundwork. I pray 50 years from now, we don't have to have people to do this, or maybe we'll have a different cause, but in the meantime, we still have to have that social responsibility to continue to pass the torch to the generation behind. William, you have a question for Corryn? You may be on mute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say wonderful presentation. I actually applied to the program that you were in last year. And it's great to hear that you did some wonderful things in that program. I just had a question for you. Have you ever been to the I think it's called the Peace and Justice Memorial in Montgomery, but it was designed by Brian Stevenson, but it kind of touches on not necessarily what happened in Selma, but it really touches on just pretty much that state-sanctioned violence in terms of terrorism against Black people by lynchings. And like, there's this monument where it has all of the lynchings in each county in the South hanging from the ceiling. It's called the Parthenon in Montgomery.
Yeah, I've been there. And it's crazy to me that in all of this time since racism was supposed to be ended, that nothing seems to have changed really. Like, I guess the baton has been passed from like just general white citizens to the police. But, we see the same thing happening over and over again. And I feel like even when we talk about the voting rights movement, I'm actually doing like another internship at the doing this one, and we're always talking about the fact that voter suppression, and then the weakening of the Voting Rights Act over time, like we're reliving this same thing that they already fought so hard for. And you're right, I do hope that in 50 years, like we're fighting for something different. But I just hope that as like students, we recognize that we have the same power and way more resources to make change than those who did back then, and that we'll take that responsibility to honor them and their work very seriously.
Well said, well said.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Corryn, for your presentation. And this is why we do this. This is the why, so that we can all, this is a form of us passing the torch at GYF, the experience going out and being there on the ground and really this type of takeaway, so you can see yourself in your internship and see how the impact can reshape and charge you and challenge you to take what you've learned and apply it going on, if not in another internship or just whatever phase you're going to in life. So this is very, very, very profound to hear, and I'm just excited and happy that you were able to have such a wonderful experience. All right, let's see who's. All right, David, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we see you.
Okay. I would like to say to my peers, everyone's presentation was great. But my presentation will be a little different. My hazard tree internship, it was 8 weeks, and with my presentation, I developed a work plan for myself. So I kind of want to run through that and tell you guys the different programs that I was involved in, because I was able to go out with the wildlife crew during my internship. I was able to go out with the invasive plant crew during my internship, and I was able to go out with the PSAR, which is a preventative search and rescue crew, for a couple of weeks during my internship. So we can get into that. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Johnson. I'm a rising senior at the first Black land-grant institution founded in 1871, which is Alcorn State University. I'm the president of my biology club on my campus. I'm an active member of the NAACP on my campus. I aspire to become president next semester. but I just don't know how that will go because some events can't be held in person because of CDC guidelines. So we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get there. I'm from Vero Beach, Florida. My hometown is also Vero Beach, Florida. And the reason I picked this internship was to honestly branch off into a different field of science because I'm actually a biology pre-dentistry major, and and another reason why I picked, well, I already told you guys why I picked this internship, so sorry about that. And like I said, I wanted to branch off to a different field of science because usually I'm inside or in labs or studying pre-dentistry or something. So I just felt like this was an opportunity for me to not only network, but to kind of get into my initial career path, which is wildlife biology. I actually wanted to become a wildlife biologist before I chose the dentistry thing. And I felt like me coming to the park and taking this opportunity was a way to kind of, get experience to that field of work. So to explain to you guys what hazard tree is a tree that poses a level of risk to people or property. These are hazardous trees. To give you guys history, and my screen's kind of small. In 1541, a party of my screen is kind of small. Hold on one second.
David, I'm sharing your presentation. Can you see it?
Yes. Okay. I can see it now. Okay, so in 1541, a party of Coronado expedition under Captain Garcia Lopez. Man. Okay. One second. Skip that part. In 1776, after the south rim of the Grand Canyon was discovered by settlers, fathers covered the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Ownership of the north rim was heavily negotiated as Arizona, Utah, and claimed territory until Arizona earned an official statehood of February 14, 1912. Okay, so I'm going to skip that part. The Grand Canyon was actually founded in 1919. And the history that I got from this was actually Buffalo soldiers. These were a group of African Americans that did a lot of trail work on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. That was research that I got from Grand Canyon. The impact. This was kind of my what I got from my impact of getting the internship versus someone sitting in the classroom setting. So what I got from this impact was that the hands-on work experience of interns to receive is priceless because this cannot be found inside of a classroom setting. I said that making my screen is like really small. Making this one of the most important impacts of the internship because I said interns such as myself could apply acquired knowledge to real life work experiences. So basically what I was saying was versus like a virtual internship, there are certain things that you can receive from doing these internships in person, which could be, networking. You could get letters of recommendation from certain people and supervisors in your department. And I also thought that taking these internships could give you a platform of opportunity to different career fields if you come into college not really knowing, what you have planned or what you want to do for your future. I feel like internships are really beneficial to this. Right here, I have listed some of my job responsibilities. I have, well, one of my job responsibilities, this is hazard tree to restore areas impacted by disturbances. So with hazard tree, to identify hazardous trees, you have to identify them by large cracks that go into or below the bark of wood. So basically when I had to go out with the hazard tree crew, there are two ways that you can identify hazardous trees. One is a wound. A wound is basically like a deep or a wide area, open hole or crack into a tree. These are usually caused by two disturbances. One disturbance is natural, which could be lightning, it could be a storm, it could be any kind of weather. And the second is man-made. Man-made could be the burning of a cigarette. Man-made could be simply cutting down a tree or trying to remove a piece of the tree, pruning it. And this can cause damage to people or property. That just two ways to identify hazardous trees. Can you go to the next slide, please?
I think there was only 2 slides here for you, David.
Okay, that'll work. Okay, so I apologize, guys. Yesterday I got the news that my aunt passed, and I'm really like just trying to, live for the moment. But to explain or to get into my site and where I worked during my internship, my place of work was the SRM. This is a Science Resource and Management building. To give you guys a brief description of what the SRM has to offer and what we do, the SRM is a division of Science and Resource Management. We comprise over 3 dozen dedicated professionals, including permanent and seasonal National Park Service members. The goal is to protect the Grand Canyon's natural resources in the park. Some programs the SRM has to offer, once again, the Science and Resource Management building has to offer, as cultural resources, data management, physical sciences, native fish and ecology and conservation, research support, wildlife. As I mentioned earlier, like I said, with my initial plan, I wanted to, become a wildlife biologist. They offer wildlife at the park and vegetation. Vegetation was another program that I was involved in during my internship. Yes, my internship was a hazard tree intern, but I got the opportunity to be involved in different programs during my 8-week internship. What vegetation is to understand, preserve, and restore the park's plant communities and serve as a modifier to resource management. So to get into my first week, my internship, my first week was an introduction to the Grand Canyon. So during my first week, I was able to get a tour of the Grand Canyon, some of the Grand Canyon sites. I was able to go get a tour go on the South Rim Trail. I was able to go on the Bright Angel Trail. I was also able to go on a trail called Hermit's Rest. During this first week, I was introduced to a group by the name of PSAR. PSAR is preventative search and rescue. Some of the responsibilities of PSAR are to educate visitors about the experience, about the extreme conditions while hiking down the Grand Canyon, because there are a lot of people that, of tourists, of course, and they sometimes come down to the Grand Canyon and they hike. They don't bring enough water. The minimum amount of water that you're supposed to bring when you're hiking is 2 liters, but a lot of people, they don't bring enough water. Sometimes they die from heat exhaustion or other things of that nature. Another program that I was introduced to was the invasive plant crew at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Their roles and responsibilities are to kind of weed out non-native species and grasses and control the non-native species in the Grand Canyon. During the invasive plant crew project, I was able to weed out some Mediterranean sage and some puncture vine. These are 2 non-native plants of Arizona. During my second week, during my hazard tree internship, I had an introduction to this was my first introduction to the hazard tree program. So what a hazard tree is a tree that has a structural defect, and it makes it more likely to fall apart or fall in whole. I already explained the hazard tree identification, but I'll go over it one more time. How to identify a hazard tree. It will have large cracks into it or below dead wood or dead pieces of bark. Like I mentioned earlier, the target wound, and I said something about the deep, wide, vast area of the hole in the tree or hazardous trees. The project that I was a part of during my hazard tree internship, it was to develop a planting plan for replacing trees that have been removed from the South Rim Village Historic District. So 3 trees that are native to the Grand Canyon are Utah juniper, pinyon pine, and ponderosa pine. Fun fact about ponderosa pine, these are larger reddish trees that have been known to smell like vanilla or butterscotch if you were to scratch the bark. During our planting plan, our goal is to monitor or remove or prune. Prune is basically cutting off branches to remove like any hazardous trees in the South Rim Historic District Village. During my third week of my hazard tree internship, this is when we had to go out and do hazard tree removals again on the South Rim. So I was able to work with the North Rim's fire effects crew. And they taught us two things. They taught us the DBH on trees. The DBH is diameter breast height. This is a standard method of expressing the diameter of a standing tree. How to get the DBH is basically the circumference of the trees. How to get the DBH, you get it with a girthing tape, and how you measure height on trees, use a device called a hypsometer. It's basically a little device where you point it at the top or the tip of the tree's grass or branch. You'll get the whole height of the trees. This is another way you can get. This is another way that you can obtain the age of a tree, because most people try to count rings, which is like most people try to count the rings on the tree, and that's how they kind of get the age. But there are two ways you can go about it. You can get the DBH and the height, or you can count the rings on the trees.
Hey, David, and I really hate to cut you off because I'm very fascinated about the research that you did over the summer, and I'm sure you're very fascinated as well. And first, I want to give you my condolences for your aunt as well. I do want to stop you here though, because we have two more presenters to go, and we do have a hard stop at 11:09. So if we could stop here, or if you want to give, I guess, one final statement just to wrap everything up. And I think William has a question. If we could stop here to wrap up.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't have a question.
I want to thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. I met very helpful people during my internship. I was able to get letters of recommendation from these people, and I was able to get my supervisor to write me an article about my experiences and the different programs that I've been involved in during my internship. So that is my concluding statement. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
All righty. Next up, we have Denasia. Denasia, are you on? Okay.
Hello.
Are you here, Denasia?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it was muted. My name is Denasia Dukes, and I was interning at 96 National Historic Site. It's located in 96, South Carolina. I'm originally from Selma, Alabama, but I moved up to Greenville, South Carolina, maybe like my 9th grade year. I graduated from here. My job at 96 was a community engagement intern. And so I was supposed to just come up with different programs and interact with the public and show them around the park. But the majority of the time that I was at the park, actually, it was still like closed due to COVID. So like the visitor center it wasn't closed like entirely, but the visitor center was closed. So like I really didn't get to interact with people like I wanted to. So I just really sat at a desk, like reading up on the history and things like that. But I did, like the visitor center did open up like partially like towards the end of the internship, and I was able to like record videos and take photographs of the park and just different stuff to post on the website. Because I went to Claflin University and I majored in digital media and things like that. So I was like, I was pretty much their digital person, and so I edited the videos and things for them. But 96 National Historic Site is mostly known for the Star Fort, and it's like this. Well, back in the day when it was formed, it was like this 14-foot tall, 8-pointed fort that the Loyalists built around 96 to against the Patriots when they was fighting against them. So it's still at the park. You can still kind of see impressions of it, but it's not as tall as it used to be. But you can still see like the 8 points around it and things like that. But it was mostly known because of that Star Fort and the siege that lasted like 28 days there against the Patriots. But nobody won. It ended in a truce pretty much. As far as like actual things that I did get to see at the park. It's a small park, so it really wasn't that many people that visited the park. So like it wasn't a lot of events going on or things of that nature. But I did get to film and record the swivel cannon being fired by my supervisor and this history professor from a nearby college. And so I did get to witness that, and that was pretty interesting and cool. But as far as like actual work, I really didn't have much to do. I kind of hated that because it was like I was just sitting in the office every day for like 8 hours, just reading and stuff. But I mean, it was better than, well, I guess it was better to be on site because last year I actually did intern with Green Youth, and I was virtual with Congaree National Park, so I wasn't able to actually visit that site as much as I have been able to visit this one. And as far as the impact, yeah, I guess like I said again, like it was better to be on site and actually be able to, be around somebody and not just on the computer all day. But there's nothing really that I learned that I didn't know, like professional wise, or I did learn a lot of history about the park or whatnot. And but yeah, that was pretty much it.
Okay, that was awesome. And you did go over your impact. Are there any questions anyone has? And I don't want to rush, but we have the next session starting at 11:10. So I just want to make sure that everyone gets a chance and an opportunity to be heard. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much, Denasia. And I'm glad that you were able to, even though it was somewhat virtual and the site was closed, I'm glad that at some point you did get a chance to interact and definitely have to partake in the whole internship experience. So thank you. And we're going to move on to the next and the final presentation. And Carlton, you are up.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So hi, I'm Carlton Jones. This year I was an interpretive and education intern at Salem Maritime National Historic Site. Saugus Ironworks is actually the sister site to Salem Maritime. It's about 20 miles away. And I graduated with a digital media arts degree from Prairie View A&M University this May. So, this is I'm just gonna make it work. I had a different PowerPoint, but this is okay. So yeah, this year my projects and duties were to create an exhibit over Black women's history in Essex County. I did have a previous internship with the National Park Service and Greening Youth last year at Cane River Creole National Historic Site in Louisiana. And I created a wayside exhibit for them there. This year was a little bit more challenging. It's a lot more responsibility to create an entire exhibit. So since the exhibit was over Black women's history in Essex County, my first thought was to create like an augmented reality exhibit, since the park stated that they wanted it to be transportable. And it was a little bit difficult trying to create something that's going to be transportable as big as an exhibit is. So that was definitely a challenge, but we ended up deciding over doing a series of videos that are all around 60 to 80 seconds in length. And it would be a series over, the first series would be over Black women's history. And we had historical figures in the park. Some names that I can throw out there for you are Sarah Parker Ramond, Rose Lovejoy, and Juno Larkham. So these are all pretty historical women that grew up in Salem. So a big thing, we didn't get to actually shoot any of the videos that we had planned, but the biggest part of the internship was actually developing a document or a script planning template. So it took a little bit of going through hoops with the digital media aspect of the park and the staff there, and then getting the okay from them saying, this is what we can and can't do and how we should portray these videos and execute them. So we did get the script done, or I'm sorry, the template. And I think that's one of the biggest, most impactful parts of the internship for me, is because this script is going to be used, after my internship concludes. So they'll use this for any videos that they shoot, and it'll be here for a while until they make changes or whatnot. So a little bit of history about Salem. It's actually the first national historic site in the United States. It was established on March 17th, 1938. The site consists of 9 acres of land and 12 historic structures and a visitor center. And then, let me see here.
Carlton, can you tell us where the site is located?
Yeah, it's in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm sorry. So yeah, I interned at Salem Maritime in Salem, Massachusetts. So, a lot of witches out there. And yeah, and then Saugus Ironworks is roughly 20 miles away, since it is the sister park to Salem. It's a place where European iron workers brought their special skills to a young Massachusetts colony. And Saugus Ironworks is a 12-acre National Historic Site, and it has a working water mill, a working water wheel, forges, mills, and a historic 17th century home. So yeah, I know we're on a time limit, so I guess I'll open the floor up to questions right now. So does anybody have any questions?
What you said you created one for Cane River, and I know Cane River, Louisiana, and Salem, Massachusetts are 2 totally different places. So I guess give us a brief comparative between the 2. Like, you were doing a similar task but in different places. Mm-hmm. So how did they differ, and how were they alike?
So last year it was a wayside exhibit that I created. The park was moving headquarters. So, and then this year, it's an entirely different approach to it. I didn't actually get to visit Cane River last year because of COVID, but I would say trying to understand how people interact with your product is probably the most challenging part of this. What was the rest of your question? I'm sorry.
I was just asking how they were alike and how are they different, but you answered it for the most part.
Oh, yeah, okay.
All right, well, this will wrap our presentation, and we're going to be ported back into the main room right about now. So thank you guys so much, and we really enjoyed all of your presentations, and I'm very appreciative to participate in this portion of the program. So thank you so much, and we will see you guys next time.